Form and Function. Remarks on Art, Design, and Architecture by Horatio Greenough. Aesthetics at Washington. An American citizen who has gone abroad to study a refined art presents himself before his fellow countrymen at disadvantage. To the uninitiated, his very departure from these shores is an accusation of the fatherland. If he sail away to strike the whale on the Pacific, or load his hold with his precious teeth and gums and sands of Africa, it is well. But to live for years among Italians, Frenchmen, and Germans, for the sake of breathing the air of high art, ancient and modern, this is shrewdly thought by many to show a lack of genius, whose boast it is to create, and we are often asked triumphantly if nature is not to be found here on this continent. They who thus reason and thus feel are not aware of the peculiar position of the aspirant to artistic activity in these states. They see that lawyers and statesmen, divines, physicians, mechanics, all are here developed, are said to be homegrown, nay, often self-made. They forget that all the elements of our civilization have been imported. They forget that our schools and colleges, our libraries and churches, are filled with the most material proof that Greek and Roman thought is even now modifying and guiding our intellectual development. A moment's attention will enable them to perceive that the American student of art only seeks to effect for his own department of knowledge a like transfer of rudimental science, and at this late day make the form of our culture harmonious with its essential and distinctive character. We are still deeply imbued, with the stern disregard of everything not materially indispensable, which was generated by ages of colonial and border and semi-savage life. We have imported writings on art in abundance, and there is scarcely a scholar in the land who cannot wield the term of dilettantism as glibly as a European professor. But unfortunately for us, the appreciation of an aesthetical theory without substantial art is as difficult as to follow a geometric demonstration without a diagram. It is sterile and impotent, as is all faith without works. If the arts of design could have simply remained in a negative state, like seeds buried in autumn, to await the action of a more genial season, we should be justified in postponing even now their cultivation. But like the bourgeoisie gentilhomme, who talked prose from his boyhood without being aware of it, we have been compelled both to design and to adorn, and our efforts from their nature must remain monuments of chaotic disorder in all that relates to aesthetics. In a word, we have negative quantities to deal with before we can rise to zero. I do not mean to say that the beautiful has not been sought and found among us. I wish and I hope to show that we have done more in a right direction than has been appreciated. We have done much in a wrong direction, too, that must be examined and repudiated. I am sensible of the disadvantage under which I labor in speaking of matters to which I have devoted my attention for many years. I regret that I have no such right to sympathy and to support as that set forth by the author of a recent work, when he says, "I have no qualifications for a critic in art, and make no pretensions to the character. I write only for the great multitude, as ill-instructed in this sphere as I cheerfully admit myself. When the writer of that profession shall have learned what the main qualifications for a critic on art really are, I cannot believe he will cheerfully renounce them. And as far as I am from a personal acquaintance with the great multitude, I cannot believe that one, as ill-instructed as themselves, is the exact person whom they would dispute to deal with matters which, to say the least of them, require some training. It is the great multitude that has decided the rank of the statesmen, the poets, and the artists of the world. It is the great multitude for whom all really great things are done, and said, and suffered. The great multitude desires the best of everything, and, in the long run, is the best judge of it. I have said this much in relation to the aesthetical observations of this writer because, though I generally sympathize with his views and often admire the expression of them, I look upon the ground he here takes as one too often taken, in itself untenable, and apt to mislead by an exaggerated expression of modesty. Substantially, it is analogous to the conduct of one who should commence by declaring that all men are free and equal, and go on to give orders to the right and left as to valets. Fain would I also lay claim to the title of self-made man. Indeed, I graduated at Harvard in 1820, which they who knew the school will allow was near enough self-making to satisfy any reasonable ambition. But since then I have been indebted to very many for light as for assistance. If there were in our character or in our institutions aught that is at war with art in the abstract, I for one would be silent, preferring the humblest labor, if any labor deserve the name of humble, to the development of an influence adverse to American freedom. I speak of art now because I think I see that it is a want widely felt, deeply felt, an intellectual want, a social want, an economical want, and that to a degree which few seem to suspect. I believe that these states need art as a visible exponent of their civilization. They call for it as a salvation from merely material luxury and sensual enjoyment. They require it as the guide and ornament of inevitable structure and manufacture. Joyfully have the governing men of England, France, and Germany beheld in the United States that policy which has denied all national education, except for the purpose of war and trade. Joyfully have they seen the individual states equally blind to the swift-coming requirements of this people, and they have founded and perfected schools of design, of which the abler pupils are employed in illustrating the national history. The lower talents fill the factory, the foundry, and the atelier to fashion fabrics for ourselves. From Boston to New Orleans, no house, no tavern, no bar-room, I had almost said, that does not give proof by the tawdry spawn of European manufacture, of our tribute to their savoir-faire, and their appreciation earns our taste. But what, it will be asked, has the development of art to do with manufactures? High art stands in relation to manufactures and all the so-called lower trades, where high literature stands in relation to social and civil life. Ask how much of the fruit of high culture and mental training reaches the public through the forum, the pulpit, and the diurnal press, and you will have the measure of the influence of pure art on structure and manufacture in all their branches. Who in England urged this matter upon the attention of Parliament, until the best models of Greece and Italy were placed within reach of every manufacturing population? The Board of Trade. That body caused to be translated from foreign languages and illustrated by elaborate drawings, the most approved works of Munich, Berlin, and Paris. They have ransacked, at great cost, the medieval magnificence of Italy to find new forms and add a grace to the products of their looms, their potteries, and their foundries. Does any statesman fancy that these governments have been invaded by a sudden love of the sublime and beautiful? I believe they who watch our markets and our remittances will agree with me that their object is to keep the national mints of America at work for themselves, and that the beautiful must, to some extent, be cultivated here, if we would avoid a chronic and sometimes an acute tightness of the money market. The statistics of our annual importation of wares, which owe their preference solely to design, will throw a light on this question that will command the attention of the most thrifty and parsimonious of our legislators. In founding a school of art, we have an obstacle to surmount, that is, a puritanical intolerance thereof. The first work of sculpture by an American hand exhibited in this country, executed for the illustrious Cooper, was a group of children. The artist was rebuked and mortified by loud complaints of their nudity. Those infantine forms roused an outcry of censure, which seemed to have exhausted the source whence it sprang, since all the harlot dancers who have found an El Dorado in these Atlantic cities have failed to reawaken it. I say seemed to have exhausted it, but only seemed, for the same purblind squeamishness which gazed without alarm at the lascivious fandango awoke with a roar at the colossal nakedness of Washington's manly breast. This fact will show how easy it is to condemn what is intrinsically pure and innocent, to say the least, how difficult to repress what is clearly bad and vicious. They who speculate upon the corrupt tastes of a public, when they have learned that genteel comedy is neglected, that tragedy is unattractive, that galleries of painting and statuary are unknown in a large and wealthy community, such speculators take their bayadeers thither as to a sure market. They know that a certain duration of abstinence, voluntary or forced, makes garbage tolerable, and ditch water a luxury. I do not venture to hope that even high art will abolish cakes and ale, but I trust before many years are lapsed no usé terpsichore of Paris or Vienna will be able to show 500,000 as a measure of our appetite for the meretricious. I wish not to be misunderstood for a moment as recommending a Smithsonian school with a hierarchy of dignitaries in art. I have elsewhere stated my conviction that such a system is hostile to artistic progress. I desire to see working normal schools of structure and ornament, organized simply but effectively, and constantly occupied in designing for the manufacturers, and for all mechanics who need aesthetical guidance in their operations, schools where emulation shall be kindled by well-considered stimuli, and where all that is vitally important in building or ornament shall be thoroughly taught and constantly practiced. I know not how far the limit of congressional action may admit the founding of such schools by the central government. Should it be impossible to interest Congress in the matter, I am not without hope that some, at least, of the state legislatures may effect it, and, failing this resource, I hope that associated individuals will combine for this object. I cannot but believe that a report, called for by Congress, on the amount of goods imported, which owe the favor they find here to design, would show the importance of such schools in an economical point of view. I believe that such a report would show that the schools which we refuse to support here, we support abroad, and that we are heavily taxed for them. I surely cannot be asking too much that the seat of government, where the national structures rise and are yearly increasing in number and importance, should present a specimen of what the country can afford in material and workmanship, in design and ornament. If this were resolved on, a stimulus would be given to exertion, while the constant experience here acquired would soon perfect a school of architectural design. The defects of the stone of which the Capitol was built could have been no secret to Mr. Bulfinch. Had there existed a board or a school or any other responsible depository of architectural experience, we should not have witnessed the deplorable recurrence to the same quarries for the construction of the Patent Office and the Treasury buildings. The outlay in paint alone, to which recourse has been had in order to sheath this friable material, would have maintained a school which would have saved us from the blunder, not to mention the great advantage we should have derived from its design and its pupils. Had the amount expended in white lead been invested, a fund would have now accumulated sufficient to reface them all with marble. I am convinced that true economy would at this moment order the Potomac stone, wherever it has been used, to be immediately replaced by a better material. Setting aside, however, the question of economy, and looking at the question of propriety, can anything be more absurd than to expend millions upon noble pieces of masonry, and then to smear them with lead, thereby reducing them to a level with the meanest shingle palace? Stone among building materials, standing where gold stands among metals. To paint stone is like covering gold with tinfoil. So far has this been carried that even in the rotunda, where no conceivable motive could exist for the vandalism, the entire masonry has been painted, and that too of various tints, so that I will venture to affirm that many carry away the idea that the whole is but a piece of carpenter's work. The treatment of the Treasury buildings, where the granite basement has been painted of one color, the columns of a second, and the wall behind them of a third, where even the lampposts have been daubed with divers tints, like a barber's pole, is noticed with priceless naivete in an important public document as a neat piece of work. What shall we say of the balustrades, where massive iron bars have been driven bodily into the columns, as though a column in a first-class building might be treated like a blind wall in the basest structure, and that, too, without a shadow of need? What shall we say of the iron railings that obtrude upon the eye, about the blockings of the patent office, and veil with their inharmonious blackness the organization of that building? What of the one slender chimney of red brick, which peers over the broken profile of the marble post office? Will any adept in the science of construction explain why the gaslight, which is seen at the eastern entrance of the Capitol, was made to hang with so many feet of tiny pipe, and then secured by shabby wires driven into the columns? Would any person conversant with the proprieties of building tolerate such a slovenly arrangement in a private house, or in a private stable, if columns formed a feature of that stable? Do not such absurd and ignorant malpractices look as if a barbarous race had undertaken to enjoy the magnificence of a conquered people, and not known how to set about it? Does anyone fancy that the uninstructed multitude does not feel these incongruities? It is not so. As well may you hope to sin against grammar in your speeches, and against decency and self-respect in your dress or deportment, and expect that it will pass unobserved. The effect produced by the grounds and shrubbery in the neighborhood of the Capitol deserves a moment's attention. There is somewhat in flower beds and fancy gardening, with GOATPoets of ephemeral plants, so out of all keeping with the character and functions of this edifice, as to give the spectator a painful sense that the idea of the adaptation of grounds to buildings has never occurred to those whose duty it was to look after these matters. Trees and verdure are beautiful, and flowers still more so, but they are impertinent adjuncts to the Capitol of the United States, and where they veil and obstruct the view of the facade, as at the post office, are insufferable. The creeping vines that have been led over the arches which support the platform in the rear of the naval monument are a grosser instance of misguided search after the picturesque. If these arches are properly constructed, the vines are impertinent, for they hide their articulation. Whether well or ill-built, the proximity of these vines is a destructive element, uselessly added to the inevitable wear of the weather. Further, if the principle which guided their introduction here be a sound one, logical sequence and harmony call for their appearance in other like situations. The recent appointment of a gentleman of approved taste to superintend the arrangement of the public grounds gives well-founded reasons to hope that these, and the like unsightly anomalies, will disappear, and that all, at least within his department, will be made in harmony with the character and purposes of the chief edifice of the country. The position of the group of Columbus and the Indian girl is anomalous and absurd. Anomalous because it invades the front view of the portico, chokes the facade, and hides another statue by the same artist. Absurd because it treats the building as somewhat on which to mount into conspicuous view, not as a noble and important vase which it is called humbly to adorn and illustrate. The statue of Washington is surrounded by dwarf cypress and clumps of rosebush. These are impertinent and ridiculous. Impertinent because they hide the pedestal and obstruct the view of the inscription, thus overlaying the intention of the monument, and that, for the mere display of ephemeral vegetation, a phenomenon, however attractive, not here in place. Ridiculous because they seem as if intended in some way to help and eke out the sculpture which, when a statue of this class requires it, must be done by replacing it with something worthy to stand alone. The grass within the railing, if cut close, destroys the monumental effect by the exhibition of frequent care. If neglected, offends by its rank growth and decay. The railings, which have been placed about the statues at the Capitol, accuse a want of respect for public property. They accuse it without remedying it, for in spite of their protection, perhaps because of it, the statues of Columbus and of Washington have received more injury in the few years that they have been so guarded that many figures wrought before the birth of Christ have suffered in coming to us through the so-called Dark Ages. I have several times seen boys at play on the portico of the Capitol, which, if right, makes it wrong there to place costly sculptures. If I protest against iron railings around statuary, it is because I believe they avail not for their object. I trust to the intelligence of the many to do justice to the artistic efforts made for their sake. In the end, I believe the people will be the best guardians of public works here, as they have proved themselves elsewhere. 4 lamps have been placed around the statue of Washington. By night they light only the feet of the figure. By day they exactly obstruct 2 of the principal views of it. I doubt not that the person who so placed these lights meant to do the statue a service. He probably never heard of the 8 views of a statue. These ever-jarring principles of magnificence and economy, laying out millions for dignity and denying the thousands necessary to ensure care, intelligence, and taste in their conservation and exposition, produce a certain compound of pretension and meanness of effect, highly to be deprecated in the great public works. I say highly to be deprecated, for however they who have given no attention to art and its influences may be surprised at the assertion, such a chaos cannot be daily seen with impunity. What first shocked becomes familiar, and the susceptibility to healthy impressions from the display of order, harmony, logical dependence, and adaptation are weakened, if not destroyed, in the observer. I have mentioned some flagrant instances of the want of care or of knowledge on the part of those whom the national buildings have been entrusted. This strain of remark might be continued until we had passed in review almost every detail of the structure and ornaments of the public works. It is an ungrateful task. Enough has been said to show that the evident intention of Congress to render these buildings and grounds worthy of the nation, both in their construction and maintenance, has thus far been very imperfectly effected. I will now state what I believe to be the reason why so much outlay has produced so unsatisfactory a result. First, I believe that the absence of any clear and distinct ideas of what is becoming, dignified, and proper in the premises lies at the root of the evil. For this, no one is to blame. The wants of this people have called, imperatively called, the active and able men of the country to pursuits far removed from an investigation of the beautiful, either in theory or in practice. These minds have been engaged in laying the foundations, broad and deep, of a mighty empire. They have reared the walls. They have distributed the blessed light and blessing air throughout the vast structure. They have tamed the forest, subdued the wilderness, and spread the benign influence of the gospel and of education from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. They have left to later days and men of other mold the task of throwing around the pillars of the state the garlands of a fine artistic culture. Had they been men intent upon the questions that occupy us now, they had been as unfit for the task imposed on them as the land was unprepared for their labors. But untutored as they were in the mysteries of art, an instinct, great, noble, and unerring, guided their decision in respect to the visible attributes of this metropolis. The selection of the site, the ground plan of this city, show the outline of a master, and years must elapse ere any school which we can found will be capable of worthily filling it. Secondly, I believe the heterogeneous and chaotic character of these buildings and grounds arises from an ill-judged interference with technical design, an arrangement on part of men in authority, whether in the legislative or executive branches of government. Since our institutions carry with them as a necessary consequence a frequent change in the personnel of government, it is clear that, if each succeeding wave of deputed authority is to leave the impress of its taste and its will upon the public structures, these must ere long be but a patchwork of as many whims, fancies, and artistic dogmas as have found favor in the eyes of the temporary occupants of place, unless some standard can be established which all will recognize, a consummation not now to be hoped for. I believe that this country is alone in referring matters of art to legislative committees. In England, committees supervise and report, and Parliament criticizes and condemns, but the artist is not interfered with in his own province. The law maxim is held good in that case. I have been told that the invention of the alto relievo upon the tympanum was due to Mr. Adams. If so, it was an unhappy exertion of his great powers. Sculpture, when it adorns buildings, is subordinate to them, and when the sculptor invades the tympanum, he must fill it, or he produces a meager and mean effect. Mr. Adams knew all of art that books and much observation could teach him, but he could not, of course, be aware of the many proprieties violated in that invention. The work has another defect as sculpture. It is the translation of rhetoric into stone, a feat often fatal to the rhetoric, always fatal to the stone. As a most honorable contrast to ever-conflicting claims of private taste and whim to obtain utterance in the public works, I feel pleasure and pride in observing the course adopted by the architect who has been honored with the task of adding to the wings of the Capitol. That architect, trained in the severest school of ancient art, had he been called on for a new building, would surely have attempted something very different from the actual Capitol. Called to enlarge it, he has sought to divest himself of every prepossession that would interfere with its harmony as a whole. He has approached his task with reverence. He has sought to keep company with his predecessor. That is not only honorable and just as regards Latrobe, but can take nothing from his own well-earned reputation. Speaking now and in view of the mere model, I doubt if it can even be in his power so widely to extend the facade without painfully isolating the cupola, and leaving the present edifice too low, too wanting in mass and weight to characterize a center. Avoiding this defect, he will triumph over a great obstacle. What the architect has here decided in reference to the original design of the Capitol seems worthy of all emulation on the part of such as, by the vicissitudes of office, may have charge of the national buildings. In all remarks upon important public edifices, there is a twofold subject under contemplation. First, the organic structure of the works. Second, their monumental character. To plant a building firmly on the ground. To give it the light that may, the air that must be needed. To apportion the spaces for convenience, decide their size, and model their shapes for their functions. These acts organize a building. No college of architects is a quorum to judge this part of the task. The occupants alone can say if they have been well served. Time alone can stamp any building as solid. The monumental character of a building has reference to its site, to its adaptation in size and form to that site. It has reference also to the external expression of the inward functions of the building, to adaptation of its features and their gradation to its dignity and importance, and it relates, moreover, to that just distinction which taste always requires between external breadth and interior detail. To ascertain what the organic requirements of a building like the Capitol are is in itself a most laborious task. To meet them requires all the science we possess. Have we not seen the House of Lords, in spite of all the experience and the knowledge brought to bear upon the vast outlay that reared it, pronounced a gewgaw by the men who were obliged to work therein? Discomfort and annoyance soon found utterance. Decoration and magnificence in such cases, like the velvet and gilding of a ship's cabin, seen with seasick eyes, aggravate our discontent. Nor is a defective arrangement merely uncomfortable. it may prove costly beyond all belief. I have been assured by one half of the chief officers of a department that one half of the employees of his section of the administration were required only by the blundering and ignorant arrangement of the edifice. To say that such oversights are inevitable is an unjust accusation of the art. When those who were called to the task of lodging one of the departments of the government, a government that makes organization the basis of their design instead of a predetermined front, which often deserves to have the inverted commas of quotations affixed to it, we shall hear no such complaints as I have above related. The men who have reduced locomotion to its simplest elements in the trotting wagon and the yacht, America, are nearer to Athens at this moment than they who would bend the Greek temple to every use. I contend for Greek principles, not Greek things. If a flat sail goes nearest wind, a bellying sail, though picturesque, must be given up. The slender harness and tall gaunt wheels are not only effective, they are beautiful, for they respect the beauty of a horse and do not uselessly task him. The English span is a good one, but they lug along more pretension than beauty. They are stopped in their way to claim respect for wealth and station. They are stopped for this, and therefore easily passed by those who care not to seem, but are. To prefer housings to horseflesh and trappings to men is alike worthy of a savage. The Washington Monument. A national monument to Washington has been designed and is in the process of construction. A lithographic print of this design is before the public. It represents an obelisk rising out of a low circular building, whose exterior presents a Greek colonnade of the Doric order. A facsimile of the endorsement of some of our most distinguished citizens recommends this design to their fellow countrymen. I propose to examine the invention. The prominent peculiarity of the design before us is the intermarriage of an Egyptian monument, whether astronomical as I believe or phallic as contended by a Boston critic, matters not very much, with a Greek structure or one of Greek elements. I do not think it is in the power of art to effect such an amalgamation without corrupting and destroying the special beauties and characters of the two elements. The one, simple even to monotony, may be defined a gigantic expression of unity. The other, a combination of organized parts assembled for a common object. The very perfection of their forms as exponents of so distinct characters makes them protest against juxtaposition. If the union of Egyptian mass and weight with the Greek combination of harmony be heterodox, the order in which they are here displayed is even more strikingly a violation of propriety. The complex, subdivided, comparatively light Greek structure is placed as a basis, a foundation. The Egyptian mass of stone rises above it. When this arrangement is stated, I must think that its palpable absurdity is demonstrated. It may be urged that those weaker and more slender columns veil a massive foundation within them. We had guessed this already because a miracle alone could otherwise sustain the weight. The pillars hide the strength of the structure, hence their impertinence as an architectural feature. It is incumbent upon edifices first to be strong, secondly to look strong. We have read of a colossus of brass with feet of clay, and the image is striking. To an architect, Egyptian weight, sustained in appearance by Greek pillars, is not less so. That buildings, in rising from the earth, be broad and simple at their bases, that they grow lighter, not only in fact, but in expression as they ascend, is a principle established. The laws of gravitation are at the root of this axiom. The spire obeys it. The obelisk is its simplest expression. Waiving the impropriety of a Doric colonnade as a basis for an obelisk, I object to that order for a circular structure. The Doric capital in its upper member echoes and parallels the entablature. In a circular structure, this is impossible without maiming the order. Your capital protests against its entablature. For circular structures in the Temple of Vesta and that beautiful ruin at Tivoli, for instance, the Corinthian capital has been adopted, but the Corinthian is too manifestly absurd a basis for a plain shaft of stone. This obelisk is made to differ essentially from the most admired specimens of that kind of monument. The differences are, first, in the relative diameters at the summit and base. Second, in the relative height of the pyramidion, which forms the apex. In Cleopatra's Needle, the base is a full diagonal of the summit of the prism. In this, the base is less than that diagonal. By this departure from example, top heaviness has been obtained. The altitude of the pyramidion in Cleopatra's Needle is equal to the width of the base, and is, of course, a very acute angle, terminating gradually the lofty shaft. In this, the pyramidion forms an obtuse angle. Its altitude is so small that a little distance will obliterate it altogether, and the obelisk must assume a truncated and, of course, unfinished appearance. When Michelangelo was wending his way from Florence to Rome, to assume the charge of finishing St. Peter's Church, his servant related that on reaching the summit of the Apennines near Poggibonsi, he turned his horse and sat gazing long and intently on the dome of Brunelleschi, the giant cupola of the Florentine Cathedral. After some time he was heard to growl, "Better than thee, I cannot. Like thee, I will not." The result was the dome of St. Peter's. Michelangelo took the responsibility, as such men always will. He did it at his peril, as all men must. Implicit conformity to precedent obliterates and annihilates the individual. Violation of it, not justified by theory or by practical result, sets the individual on no enviable pedestal. A throne may become a pillory. The obelisk has, to my eye, a singular aptitude in its form and character, to call attention to a spot memorable in history. It says but one word, but it speaks loud. If I understand its voice, it says, "Here." It says no more. For this reason, it was that I designed an obelisk for Bunker Hill, and urged arguments that appeared to me unanswerable against a column standing alone. If this be the expression of the obelisk, I object to the site of the proposed monument. I protest also against the enormous dimensions of this structure. It is another example of the arithmetical sublime, an attempt to realize in art the physical truth that many little things united form one great one, which in art is not true. A monolith, a single shaft of granite, has a value like that of a diamond, a value which increases in a geometric ratio with its weight. Why? Because its extraction from the quarry, its elaboration and safe erection, show not only wealth but science. The Temple of Minerva at Athens, the marvel of ancient as of modern critics, was scarce larger than one of our schoolhouses. It was great, but not large. It was a jewel both of design and structure. It was an embodiment of thought. To be impressive, a monument must contain thought and feeling. Flendum est primum ipsi tibi. Your 500 feet of granite built as chimneys are, stone by stone, a failure. It shows how much you are willing to spend to have done with it. Il faut payer du sapot. A structure which rises 500 feet from the ground and bears the name of Washington must form a unique feature in the metropolis. It must command the attention of everyone, be he American or a foreigner. He who sees its lofty shaft, towering into the blue and holding the sunshine after twilight, is gray below. What will be its effect, artistically speaking? Kneading into incongruous contact elements hitherto only jumbled by conquest and ruin, truncated, bare, without gradation and without finale, standing upon crumbling detail, heavy above and light below it, it will be a symbol of huge aspiration and chaotic impotence. Monuments to really great men are opportunities on which to hang the proofs of the development of art. The great need them not. We need them. The tombs of the Medici embody the theory of Buonarroti. The statue of Frederick is the apotheosis of Prussian sculpture. The obelisk which stands at the entrance of the Champs-Élysées is typical of African conquest. Like the captive elephants led into a Roman show, its exotic form gives significance to the triumph that placed it there. The monoliths that tower before the Roman basilicas have also a certain propriety in the residence of an absolute temporal prince who is at the same time assumed to be the vicar of Christ. All forms may be collected without, as all tongues are spoken within. I am aware that there is scarce an architect in the country that could not have demonstrated the absurdity of the monument I have examined, and have thus prevented its consummation. Why were they all silent?
Like, subscribe, notification bell, join the herd.